Last week, I jokingly warned everyone that rather than getting the customary pedicure or trimming of my toenails in preparation for Maundy Thursday, I was instead going to wear the same socks for the entire week. That way, I explained, we'd understand not just Jesus' humility and servant love in washing his disciples' feet, but also maybe Peter's overdramatic response. Most of the time we assume Peter reacts this way because he doesn't want Jesus doing the work of a servant, and I'm sure that was part of it. But his response is so forceful, almost horrified, I can't help wondering if there's more to it. Because Peter doesn't just tell Jesus, "You'll never wash my feet," as if he's explaining the dirty work should be done by someone else. And in the original language, he's saying something more like, "You're never, ever going to wash my feet, Jesus. Not in a million years, not for all eternity." It's a bit of an overreaction, don't you think? Unless maybe Peter was a little embarrassed. Maybe he had stinky feet, long, raggedy yellow toenails, foot hair rivaling a hobbit's, or maybe he was just particularly ticklish between his toes. Maybe it wasn't just that Jesus was going to serve him, but that in serving him with such intimacy, Jesus was going to know him in a way that made Peter profoundly uncomfortable. Maybe it's hard for us to conceptualize exactly, so think of it this way. Suppose the bishop or your boss shows up at your house unexpectedly, and as you are trying to cobble together some fancy hors d'oeuvres from the last of the Pop-Tarts and Lunchables, he dons your apron in the kitchen. He grabs your Clorox and your scrubbing bubbles and your toilet brush, and he announces he's going to go clean your bathrooms. Excuse me, what? Bishop, did you just say you're going to go clean my bathroom? You ask, a bit stunned and horrified as you try to remember the last time you cleaned out the drain in your tub or took out the overflowing trash. You'll understand later, I promise, he replies. No, Bishop, you say, careening down the hallway and blocking the bathroom door. You can't go in there. You're never, ever going to clean that bathroom. And the bishop looks at you and says in deadpan, look, if I don't clean your bathroom, then you can't be a part of this diocese anymore. In fact, you got to hand in your card for being an Episcopalian. And so after the most uncomfortable half hour of your life, the bishop reappears and you catch a distinct whiff of bleach and other things unique to the bathroom on his clothes, and you keep to wondering who knows what he's seen and cleaned up in your bathroom, or worse, your children's bathrooms. And then he says, do you understand what I've done for you? If I've cleaned your bathrooms, you ought to clean each other's bathrooms. Servants are not greater than their masters. See, now I get Peter's reaction. Maybe you do too. The very thought of this is almost enough to make me reconsider my ordination vows. Look, we might say we want to be loved for who we really are. But it is downright unnerving to even think about being vulnerable, this vulnerable with anyone, let alone someone in a position of authority or respect. When someone knows the deep truth about you and your deep imperfections, whether it's smelly feet or dirty bathrooms or something else that makes you feel unworthy or unlovable, it can be hard to trust that they'll keep on treating you in the same way, that they won't begin to pity you, avoid you, or worse, reject you entirely. It's so much easier for us to consider loving others in their shortcomings than to consider being loved in our own. It's why, to me, the introductory line to this story is so crucial. It gives us the assurance that nothing we can do or be will ever gross out, disappoint, anger, or upset Jesus enough to drive him away. Because Jesus, as we're told, having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. He didn't just love them at the beginning when everything was shiny and new, when politeness kept bickering at a minimum, when it was easy to hide your imperfections and your worst self, when there were only 12 of the disciples and miracles still seemed like magic, when they operated in relative obscurity and the threat of death and the cross didn't hang over every word Jesus spoke. He loved them to the end, after they'd gotten to know each other and their flaws and their annoying habits, after people started following him more than they could manage, after they'd been around each other so much they knew exactly how each other would respond to the smallest slights and everyday grievances. After all of that, he loved them to the end. And it's tempting, given that this does happen just before the crucifixion, to think of this end as only Jesus' death. It is certainly that, but it's not exactly all that that phrase means. The writer of John doesn't use the word for death here. He uses another word, telos. It's a Greek philosophical term. It means something like the ultimate inherent purpose of a thing based on its essential fundamental nature. So the telos of war, its inherent purpose based on its nature, is victory. The telos of business, the inherent purpose based on its nature, is making money. And to John, the telos of Jesus, the inherent purpose based on his nature, is love, servant love. In other words, Christ's inherent purpose and his essential nature are the exact same thing. There's no difference between them. So that when we hear that Jesus loved his own in the world to the very end, it means not just to the end of his life, not just to the end of their lives, or even just to the end of the world. He's loving them to the deepest end of himself and to the farthest end of who they really, truly are. All this love talk begins to sound warm and fuzzy until you start thinking about who was at the table with Jesus on that night. There was Simon the Zealot, who wanted to overthrow Rome. And there was Matthew, the tax collector, who had literally been in league with Rome. Jesus loved them to the end of themselves. There was the uneducated, blue-collar fisher folk with rough hands, and there was the refined, intellectual thinker under the fig tree in Nathaniel. Jesus loved them too, to the ends of themselves. There were James and John, the sons of thunder, who thought themselves better, always angling for power and prestige. And there was Judas, who thought he knew better than the rest about how to bring salvation to the world. And he betrayed Jesus. Down to the most hidden depths of themselves, Jesus loved his disciples. Just as he loves you, just as he loves me, just as he loves us, he can do nothing else. Love flows out of Jesus and over everyone he encounters. Because love is both who he is down in his bones and his entire purpose deep within his soul. And this is the type of love he commands the disciples to have, us to have. Love one another as I have loved you, with this type of love. He's not just giving them this self-help guide on how to live. He's not just calling them to doing good deeds of love and service in the world. He's calling us to love as he did, to share in his telos, to have love be both our essential nature and our ultimate purpose. So that acts of love are no longer something we are trying to do, but become an outgrowth of who we are, as natural as breathing, so that as we walk in the world, we breathe in love and we breathe out love. Until what is dying in us and in each other and in the world is revived and restored by God's love and Spirit. This is an invitation to transformation for disciples of every generation. To live in the world with love flowing out of the depths of our deepest selves. just as it did with Christ. The kind of love that can only come through and from Christ. So that when we encounter betrayers and ladder climbers, when we encounter violent revolutionaries and exploiting profiteers, as we encounter the rough, uneducated, and the refined intellectuals, as we encounter the worst and the best in the world and in ourselves, we find there at the end of it all, at the end of ourselves and at the end of each other, is still love, is Christ himself. So that we can walk out into the world with our stinky feet, with our dirty bathrooms, and whatever else makes you feel unworthy and unloved, and still love. Love each other. Love God. Love even ourselves to the very end. Amen.